Mad Movie Mark with another Mad Movie Mark movie review. Continuing my trek through the Rotten Tomatoes landscape, I will be attempting to view and review all 206 movies that have a 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And then after I have reviewed and reviewed all of them, I will come out with my rating and let you know which ones I think are the worst and which ones I think are the best. I am going in chronological order. I started at the 1920s, and now I'm working my way through 2022. This is the 1931 version of Frankenstein, so we are number 8 out of 206. If you saw my other reviews, then you will know that I did the 1920 version of Golem. So the story Golem is a Jewish folklore, and it is believed to be the material that Mary Shelley used when she created Frankenstein. It's not sure. I mean, there's nothing there's no proof of this, but the story is so close to Frankenstein, and there's so many similarities that it's just viewed that she had to have borrowed from the Golem. The Golem is free. It's lost all of its copyrights. It was released in 1920. There are two versions of it. One version is in black and white, at least two that you can find on YouTube. One is in black and white, and then one uses different colored lenses throughout the movie, sort of like in Nosferatu, if you've ever seen Nosferatu. So when there's like scenes of magic, it'll be green. If they're going outside, it'll be like a yellow or a red tent. There's also blues and purples, and the colored version with the colored lenses, I think, is far superior to the just black and white version that you will find as well. Because it lost its copyrights, a lot of people try to recreate and mass distribute these movies. So some of them qualities are poor compared to others. But anyway, if you want to maybe look at the source material that could have been from Frankenstein, I suggest you guys go and watch The Golem, and then you can watch my review after and let me know what I got right and what I got wrong. So this is, like I said, this is the 1931 version of Frankenstein. I will say that many years ago, I watched young Dr. Frankenstein, and now I can appreciate that movie more because they definitely borrowed from this movie quite a bit, and there were points in this movie where I was actually laughing out loud when you weren't really supposed to, just because I was remembering things from Young Frankenstein. There's a scene specifically that I will talk about later. So I'm going to go over the entire plot. I'm sure everyone knows generally what Frankenstein is and what it's about, but I'll go over the plot of the movie, and then I'll, like normal, I'll tell you what I think and give my review of it. So it stars Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein, Mae Clark as Elizabeth, Boris Karloff as the monster, and Dwight Fryer as Fritz. So originally this was, the monster was called Frankenstein's monster because the last name of the doctor is Frankenstein. Back then, a lot of people just called the monster Frankenstein, but they remedied this in the follow-up to this movie. They did The Bride of Frankenstein, and then they started calling the monster Frankenstein. So in this movie, it's just called the monster. Later on, he becomes Frankenstein. So essentially, this movie opens up with Fritz, who is the assistant of Dr. Frankenstein. They are both grave robbing, trying to find the bright specimens for their monster that they will be building. They also will need a brain as well, so they try to find a brain last. Their idea is to use this guy who is hanging from a tree, but when they cut him down, they realize that he has brain damage because he was hanging from this tree, so they can no longer go that route. So what they have to do is Dr. Frankenstein originally was in school, and then he decided to drop out to pursue his dream of reanimating corpses and finding new scientific discoveries. So he dropped out of school, so Fritz goes and kind of breaks into his school late at night during after hours, and he goes to steal a normal brain, but he drops it on the ground and it breaks. So then he steals an abnormal brain, which just reminds me of young Dr. Frankenstein, when Frankenstein says, or Frankenstein says, what was the name on this brain? And he says, Abby. And like, Abby who? Abby normal. So it's an abnormal brain that he takes. He takes it back to Dr. Frankenstein and doesn't let him know that this is an abnormal brain. And then comes the day. They need a lot of electricity to do this. They need everything to kind of, the stars to align for this to happen correctly. So they bring him back to the lab. Everything's correct. They're ready to do this. And then a knock on the door happens, and they go down and answer the door. And it's the professor, it was his professor before he dropped out of school, and it is his girlfriend. He says, okay, let's bring him up. Let's tell him what's going on. So they bring him up. He sits him down, and he says to his professor, I believe that I can reanimate a corpse, make him come back to life, give him life, and actually sustain the life. And the professor doesn't believe it. He kind of says, I'll believe it when I see it. So in front of the professor, in front of everyone, he takes the Frankenstein up on a kind of a cart, not a cart, but, you know, he kind of lifts him up, and the electricity happens, and he comes back down, and then Frankenstein starts moving. Then he has a chat with the professor. The professor thinks that this is not something that should happen. It's kind of like in Jurassic Park, where people thought about if they could, but not whether they should, type of thing. I didn't get the quote right, but that's kind of how the conversation goes. And he says, well, where would people be in science if they didn't branch out and try different things that they thought would be correct? So he's doing this for noble reasons. He not to be rich or famous, but he believes that he's contributing to science, and that this is something that will help the world one day in many different ways. So the monster ends up becoming a bit ornery, and he becomes a bit angry after a while. So they decide they have to kind of put him in the dungeon where he can be crazy and angry and not hurt anyone. But Fritz decides to go down, and even though, you know, the monster is chained up and can't fight back for himself, Fritz decides to be a real jerk to him, and, you know, starts like throwing fire in his face because he's afraid of fire. And, you know, just starts like basically teasing him. I have my thoughts for why Fritz is doing this. I think it's two reasons. He's always been kind of second fiddle to Dr. Frankenstein. Maybe he feels like he has some kind of power, some kind of ranking over Frankenstein, to where now he's in the driver's seat and he's the boss. Or maybe he was bullied as a kid because he has the hump on his back, and now he is projecting that onto Frankenstein's monster. Or maybe he's just a jerk, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, they kind of cut away, and then you hear Fritz with a loud, just terrible scream, blood-curdling scream, and they run downstairs, and they notice that he is dead. Frankenstein has been able to come out of his, his restraints, and they shut the door real quick. Dr. Frankenstein is beside himself. He says, I'm the reason why Fritz is dead. This is terrible. I can't believe what happened. And then a knock on the door again, and it's Dr. Frankenstein's parents. So while the professor and the girlfriend are down there attending to the parents, they hear a loud sound, and they come upstairs, and they see that Dr. Frankenstein is now on the ground. He seems a bit injured, like maybe he got into a tussle with the monster, and he's also now still beside himself. He's still in anguish that Fritz is dead. And the parents decide that they're going to take Dr. Frankenstein home, and that the professor is going to kind of end this scientific experiment. He's going to stop it where it lies. And, maybe one day it'll contribute to science, but it's not going to be today because this doesn't seem to be working out. There's an abnormal brain in him. It's the brain of a criminal. And, we gave it a good college try, or a good old college dropout try, and it didn't work. So Dr. Frankenstein goes back with his parents, and the professor stays in the lab working on the monster. Only the monster eventually comes alive and kills the professor. News is brought to Dr. Frankenstein about this when he's at his parents' house. He feels obviously even more bad about this. So he goes back to try to find his monster and figure out what happened. Now, at this point, the monster has escaped the castle where he's been held, and he has found a nice little farm house with a lake. And a little girl is at the lake and she's by herself. He approaches the little girl. The little girl is very nice to him. She says, like, "Do you want to play with me?" And he says, which means yes in Frankenstein. So they sit down near the lake, and they start throwing flowers in the lake, and the flowers are floating. And he says, and he's very excited by this. So he decides he's going to try it with the girl, and he throws the girl in the lake, and then she sinks, and then he doesn't know what to do, so he says, and he leaves. He gets out of Dodge, and kind of the next scene, we see the father of the girl, and he's carrying her through town, and unfortunately she has drowned. And he goes up, I think he's like the mayor or of some prominence in the town, and he brings his daughter to this guy, and he says, "My daughter drowned." And he says, "Oh my God, that's so terrible, but why are you bringing her to me?" And he says, "Because she was killed." And then, of course, they need to get a mob together, and they need to get this beast that has killed the daughter. I mean, it makes sense. That's what you should do. So then we see Frankenstein. He's in sort of like it's like made of grass or straw or something in a tower, and Dr. Frankenstein ends up finding him, and they end up having a tussle at the top of this tower, and the angry mob starts coming up to Frankenstein and the monster with like flame, this fire on sticks or whatever, and the monster throws Dr. Frankenstein. Oh, it's a windmill. Now I remember. It's a wooden windmill that they're at. Throws Frankenstein over the windmill, and then he falls on like one of the, one of those things that spin on the windmill. I don't remember what it's called. But you got like 4 things here. It spins and it makes wind. He falls on one of those, and the town rescues him. He's fine. He's still alive. And then they set fire to the windmill, and then that's basically closed curtain, end of story. That's the movie. So what do I think of this movie? First of all, I will say that I am a huge fan of Halloween. My fiance and I are getting married on Halloween this year. I am a even bigger fan of Frankenstein. I mean, no one's going to care, but I have a tattoo of Frankenstein on me. I dressed as Frankenstein last year. So I'm a big Frankenstein fanatic. And I love this movie. This movie, to me, it's almost, I mean, it's very, very good. There are parts in it that I think kind of, I'm not too fond of. The whole stuff with his dad when he goes back to his dad's house, and he's no longer in the scene. He's no longer in the action. That stuff is kind of, I don't know. I could do without it. I just want him and Monster. I want Dr. Frankenstein and Monster is what I want. But the acting in this movie is very good, especially Colin Clive, who plays Dr. Frankenstein. He's very good as kind of the tormented scientist who desperately wants to contribute to science, but also is just completely horrified and sickened by the fact that he lost his friend. And he plays both parts well. He does emotion in this movie very well. Also, the Frankenstein's monster, he's played by Boris Karloff. This is kind of Boris Karloff's introduction into acting. This is what really made him big. And, I think he does a good job as the monster. There's not any spoken dialogue he has to do. But, he does, just like with the Golem, he does a very good job of kind of walking stiff like you're supposed to. I mean, this wasn't a science back then. Like, people now, when they mimic Frankenstein, they do the stiff walk and things like that. But that's because that's what Boris Karloff gave us, So I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but even if he borrowed a little bit from the story is borrowed from the Golem, and maybe he borrowed a little bit from the Golem, it's still very good. His acting in this movie, when he's with the little girl, when he needs to be intense and scary, and then when he needs to be kind of more gentle with the girl, and he kills her by accident. It's not something he wanted to do. He's very good at that also. The professor is also very good. He definitely thinks that this is a bad idea, and when they're talking to each other and they're trying to each give their reasonings and reason things out, I think they both have very good reasons for why or why not this should happen, and they both do a very good job. So I like this movie. I mean, this is kind of the grandfather of horror movies. These type of movies is kind of where horror movies came from. They were the first. This movie is technically not labeled a horror movie because I don't think they were using that terminology yet. So this even predates the genre horror movie. But, that's what it is. And it does a very good job of what it needs to do. And it's not like the 9s and 10s that I would normally give a movie. It doesn't go that extra mile. I think it's a great movie. I give it at 8.5, which is still a very good score. I can't give everything 9s and 10s, but I think 8.5 is a very good score. And I recommend this movie to anyone who wants to watch a very early horror movie. This movie isn't necessarily scary for our time, so I don't think you'll necessarily be scared by it. But for me, it's sort of like when there's horror movies where you get a jump. There's horror movies when you get a scare. But this is a horror movie which is really, really solid acting. And, I think that if you want to watch a movie that just has really great acting, has a really good story, that you probably already know the story, I think you're going to be happy with this movie. So I give it an 8.5. And I hope you will join me when I review the next movie, which is just one letter. It's a letter M. Thank you. I hope you have a great day.